Have you seen the Epstein files?
I have not reviewed the entirety of it myself, but a good amount.
Okay. Would it be fair to say that Mr. Epstein trafficked young women, including, in some instances, minors, for sex to himself?
That was specifically the allegations in the 2018 indictment in the Southern District of New York.
Okay. Who else did he traffic these young women to?
In terms of what the investigation, again, going back to 2008, Mr. Acosta, who limited the investigation and limited the search warrants and limited the parameters of the investigation, the only thing we are able to speak to publicly, because he was given a non-prosecution agreement by Mr. Acosta, is that first time period from, I believe, don't quote me on this, 97 to 2001-ish.
Let's go people Adam here. FBI Director Kash Patel was publicly humiliated by a federal judge who called out his misleading arguments to keep the Epstein files hidden. Trump's hand-picked FBI chief was demolished in open court in a moment that felt ripped from a political thriller. The documents that could expose connections between Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking operation and powerful people in politics, finance, entertainment, and even royalty. Files that the government has been sitting on for years. Files that Congress just passed a law demanding be released. And Kash Patel has been fighting tooth and nail to keep them hidden, until Judge Richard Berman stepped in and said, "No, not anymore. You're releasing these files and you're doing it now." The scene inside that courtroom must have been absolutely electric. Patel standing there, his legal team scrambling, the judge delivering a ruling that left everyone stunned. You could have heard a pin drop when Judge Berman delivered his order. Patel froze, like visibly froze. His lawyers looked panicked because they had just been told by a federal judge that their arguments were completely without merit and that they were going to be forced to release documents they desperately want to keep hidden.
The Justice Department has a month to release these files, and Attorney General Pam Bondi was pressed about what will come out and when, but she was non-committal about what to expect.
We will continue to follow the law with maximum transparency while protecting victims.
The resolution Congress passed allows Bondi to withhold information about victims, obscene material, or evidence that could compromise national defense or foreign policy. However, she has to report anything withheld. This matter could be complicated or delayed as President Trump directed the Justice Department to investigate Epstein's ties to prominent banks and Democrats. Earlier this year, the Justice Department said it did not have evidence to open new Epstein-related investigations, but changed course last week at the president's direction. The files could be part of that active probe and not released because of it. If the files are not published, a law professor tells us that Congress could try to hold the Justice Department in contempt of Congress, but that is unlikely because the DOJ would have to file charges against itself.
The courtroom was packed. Members of Congress were there. Media was there. Victims' advocates were there. Everyone watching this unfold, and Patel is standing there realizing he just lost, that his strategy of delay and obstruction just hit a brick wall named Judge Richard Berman. Now, why is Patel fighting so hard to keep these files secret? That's the question everyone is asking. Congress passed a law demanding release with overwhelming bipartisan support, a vote in the House, and unanimous consent in the Senate. The American people overwhelmingly want these files public. There's no legitimate reason to keep hiding them at this point. So why is Patel, who supposedly works for the American people, working so hard to protect whatever is in those files? The cynical answer is that the files contain information that would be damaging to Trump or people in Trump's orbit. That releasing them would create political problems. And Patel's job as Trump's loyalist running the FBI is to protect Trump, not to serve justice or transparency.
Breaking news now to pass along in the Jeffrey Epstein sex trafficking investigation. This afternoon, a federal judge rejected a push by the Department of Justice to unseal grand jury transcripts. Judge Richard Berman blasted that request, calling it a diversion. He said no victims testified, only an FBI agent with hearsay knowledge of this case. He added that the information in the transcripts, quote, pales in comparison to the amount of evidence and materials that the government could release at any point. The Justice Department says it will begin giving documents to the House Oversight Committee a little later this week.
Patel has been defiant in his public statements. When pressed by lawmakers about releasing the files, he said, "I'm not going to break the law to satisfy your curiosity. That quote is revealing. First, because it frames the request as curiosity rather than a lawful demand from Congress. Second, because it suggests Patel sees himself as above congressional oversight, that he can decide which laws to follow based on what serves his interest. And third, because legal experts say he's wrong about the law, that releasing these files wouldn't break any law, that he has the authority and the obligation to comply with Congress's directive. So, Patel is essentially lying about his legal constraints to justify his political obstruction. Judge Berman saw through this. His order specifically states the government is the logical party to make comprehensive disclosure to the public of the Epstein files. The government, that's the FBI, that's Patel's agency. They have the files. They have the authority to release them. They have the obligation under the law Congress just passed. And Judge Berman is saying there's no legitimate legal reason not to release, that the excuses Patel is making don't hold up, that he needs to comply, and if he doesn't, he'll be in contempt of court.
You've seen most of the files. Who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these young women to besides himself?
Himself. There is no credible information. None. If there were, I would bring the case yesterday that he trafficked to other individuals. And the information we have, again, is limited.
So the answer is no one?
For the information that we have.
In the files?
In the case file.
Okay. Now, President Trump has deferred to the FBI and the Department of Justice with respect to the Epstein records. He says it is your call about releasing them. And I understand that the department and the agency have decided to release them in cooperation with the House committee. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So you're releasing them a little bit at a time. Is that correct?
We're releasing as much as we can, but we are limited by 3 different court orders, and the department went back to each of those judges to waive those court orders or have them lifted, and each of those judges declined.
That's a federal judge telling the FBI director that he's out of excuses and time. The broader context here is absolutely crucial. Patel has been a controversial FBI director from day one. He's a Trump loyalist with no real FBI or law enforcement experience. He was installed to politicize the Bureau, to turn it into a tool for Trump's agenda rather than an independent law enforcement agency. And his tenure has been marked by mass firings of career agents, political interference in investigations, attacks on Trump's enemies, and protection of Trump's allies. The Epstein file situation is just the latest example of Patel putting Trump's political interests above his duty to the American people. So buckle up, because what I'm about to break down, the legal significance of Judge Berman's order, what's likely in these Epstein files, why Patel is so desperate to keep them hidden, and what happens next is intense. This is about government transparency versus elite cover-ups, about the rule of law versus political corruption, and we're watching it play out in real time in a federal courtroom. Let's dive deep into what actually happened in that courtroom and why it matters so much. Judge Richard Berman isn't just any judge. He was the judge who presided over Jeffrey Epstein's case when Epstein was arrested. He's familiar with the evidence. He knows what the government has. He knows what's been kept secret and what's been made public. So when Kash Patel stands up in his courtroom and claims that seal orders and grand jury secrecy prevent release of the Epstein files, Berman knows whether that's true or not. And his ruling makes clear it's not true, at least not in the sweeping way Patel is claiming. Let's talk about grand jury secrecy, because that's Patel's main excuse. Grand jury proceedings are secret. That's a rule designed to protect witnesses, protect the integrity of investigations, and protect people who are being investigated but not charged. It's an important rule, but it's not absolute. There are exceptions. Courts can authorize disclosure. The government can choose to release information that was presented to a grand jury if there's a compelling reason and proper procedures are followed. And Congress just passed a law saying there's a compelling reason: the public interest in knowing about Epstein's sex trafficking network and who was involved. So, when Patel claims his hands are tied by grand jury secrecy, he's being misleading. Yes, some information presented to grand juries is secret, but the FBI has lots of information about Epstein that wasn't presented to grand juries. Investigative reports, interview transcripts, financial records, flight logs. Much of this was gathered through normal investigation, not through grand jury subpoenas, and even information that was presented to grand juries can often be released with proper procedures and court approval. Patel is using grand jury secrecy as a blanket excuse to hide everything, and Judge Berman called him out on it. The seal court orders claim is similarly misleading. Yes, there may be some court orders sealing specific documents or proceedings, but those orders typically apply to narrow categories of information for specific reasons. They don't create a blanket prohibition on releasing everything about Epstein. And if Congress has now passed a law mandating disclosure, courts can modify their sealing orders to comply with that law. Patel is acting like seal orders are this immutable barrier that prevents him from doing anything. But that's not how it works. Courts unseal documents all the time when circumstances change or when there's sufficient public interest. What Judge Berman is saying in his order is that Patel needs to go through the files systematically. Identify what can be released. Identify what genuinely needs to remain confidential for legitimate reasons, like protecting victims' identities or ongoing investigations, and release everything else. That's a reasonable, balanced approach. It protects legitimate confidentiality interests while maximizing transparency. And Patel's refusal to do this suggests he's not interested in balance. He's interested in hiding everything. Now, let's talk about what's likely in these files. Based on previous reporting, court documents from civil cases, and testimony from Epstein's trial and Ghislaine Maxwell's trial, we know the FBI has extensive documentation. Flight logs from Epstein's private planes showing who traveled with him and when. Some of these flights included underage girls. Financial records showing payments to victims and to people who enabled the trafficking. Communications between Epstein and his associates discussing logistics of trafficking. Photographs taken at Epstein's properties. Witness statements describing parties and encounters. Investigative reports detailing what FBI agents found when they searched Epstein's properties. The names in these files potentially include politicians from both parties, business executives, scientists, and academics who received Epstein funding, lawyers who represented him, foreign dignitaries and royalty, entertainment industry figures. Some of these people are innocent. They knew Epstein socially or professionally before his crimes were widely known. Others are more troubling. People who visited his private island, who were on flights with underage girls, who appear in suspicious communications. The files will let the public distinguish between innocent association and potential complicity, and that's what makes them so explosive. Trump's name has come up in Epstein connections. They knew each other socially. There are photos of them together. Trump has made comments about Epstein liking beautiful women on the younger side. Trump has said they had a falling out and weren't close when Epstein's crimes came to light. But the Epstein files might reveal more about the nature and extent of their relationship. And that's probably one reason why Patel, Trump's loyalist, is fighting so hard to keep the files secret. If the files show Trump had closer connections to Epstein than previously known, it's politically devastating. But it's not just about Trump. There are likely other powerful people from across the political spectrum who would be damaged by full disclosure. That's why the instinct in Washington has been to keep these files buried, to protect the elite regardless of party. Judge Berman's order challenges that instinct. It says, the public interest in transparency outweighs the private interest in protecting powerful people from embarrassment or scrutiny. Patel's performance in the courtroom was reportedly awful. He was evasive. He contradicted himself. His lawyers made arguments that didn't hold up under questioning from the judge, and when Judge Berman started pointing out the flaws in their legal reasoning, Patel visibly struggled. He's not a skilled lawyer or a seasoned law enforcement professional. He's a political operative who got promoted way beyond his competence, and it showed. Judges like Berman, who've spent decades on the bench, can spot bogus legal arguments immediately. And Patel's arguments were transparently without merit. The moment Judge Berman issued his order, the dynamic in the courtroom shifted. Patel's lawyers started whispering urgently. Patel himself looked like he'd been punched, because they realized they lost, that their strategy of delay and obstruction had failed, that they were going to be forced to produce documents. And once those documents start coming out, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. The information becomes public. The names get reported. The connections get investigated, and whoever's in those files faces scrutiny they've been avoiding for years. The packed courtroom amplified the drama. Members of Congress who pushed for the Epstein files release were there to watch. They saw Patel get taken down by the judge. They heard the judge call out Patel's misleading arguments, and they left ready to increase pressure, to hold oversight hearings, to demand accountability. Because if the FBI director is openly defying Congress and using bogus legal arguments to hide evidence, that's a massive problem. That's the kind of thing that should lead to removal from office. Victims' advocates who were in the courtroom were emotional. For years, they've been fighting for transparency and accountability. For years, they've been told that files can't be released for various legal reasons. And now a federal judge is saying those reasons are garbage, that the files can and should be released. That's a form of vindication. It's a sign that maybe finally the truth will come out. That the people who enabled Epstein's crimes might face consequences. That justice delayed for so long might actually happen. Media coverage of the hearing has been intense. Because this isn't just a legal story. It's a story about power and accountability. About whether elite criminals and their enablers can be protected by government secrecy. About whether Trump's loyalists can obstruct justice and transparency to protect their patron. The visual of Patel frozen in the courtroom as the judge delivers a devastating ruling is compelling television. That's the kind of moment that captures public attention and shifts narratives. Patel's broader tenure as FBI director has been a disaster. He's fired hundreds of career agents who weren't sufficiently loyal to Trump. He's opened investigations into Trump's political enemies. He's closed investigations into Trump's allies. He's turned the FBI from an independent law enforcement agency into a political tool. Current and former FBI agents are horrified. They're speaking out anonymously about the politicization and the damage to the Bureau's credibility. Some have resigned in protest. Others are just trying to keep their heads down and survive until Patel is gone. The calls for Patel's resignation have been growing. Democrats have been demanding it since day one. But now some Republicans are joining in, because even Republicans who support Trump are uncomfortable with how blatantly Patel has politicized the FBI. How he's violated norms and traditions that both parties used to respect. How he's turned the Bureau into a partisan weapon. The Epstein files controversy is just making it worse, because now Patel isn't just politicizing the FBI. He's using it to cover up for powerful people who might be connected to sex trafficking. That's a bridge too far even for some Trump supporters. Judge Berman's order creates legal obligations for Patel and the FBI. They have to produce the files. They have timelines they need to meet. And if they don't comply, they can be held in contempt. That means fines. That means potential jail time for officials who defy court orders. Patel can try to appeal the order. He can ask higher courts to intervene. But appeals take time, and his arguments are weak. Most legal experts think the order will stand, that Patel is going to be forced to release the files whether he wants to or not. The coming weeks will determine whether Patel actually complies or whether he continues to resist. If he complies, we'll start seeing Epstein files released to the public. That will be a massive story. Every release will be combed through for names and revelations. It will dominate news cycles for months. If Patel continues to resist, we'll see a constitutional crisis. A presidential appointee openly defying a federal judge and Congress. That would force other branches of government to respond. Congress could hold Patel in contempt. They could impeach him. The courts could impose sanctions. It would be chaos. The immediate impact on transparency is clear. If Judge Berman's order is upheld and Patel complies, we're going to see a massive document release. Flight logs showing who traveled on Epstein's planes, financial records showing who received money or payments, communications revealing relationships and arrangements, investigative reports detailing what the FBI found. This will be the most comprehensive public disclosure about Epstein's operation we've ever had. It will answer questions that have been speculation for years. And it will implicate people who thought they were safe. The political fallout cannot be overstated. If Trump's name appears in damaging context in these files, it's a huge problem for him politically. His opponents will use it as evidence of his connection to a sex trafficker. His supporters will claim it's a political hit job. But if there's documentary evidence, flight logs, financial records, communications, it's hard to dismiss. Even loyal supporters might be troubled if the evidence is strong enough. And moderate voters who were already skeptical of Trump would see it as confirmation of their concerns. The impact on Patel's position is equally significant. He's already a controversial FBI director facing calls for resignation. This courtroom humiliation makes his position more precarious. Trump might stick with him out of loyalty, but Trump also doesn't like losers. And Patel just lost badly in court. If Patel becomes more of a liability than an asset, Trump might throw him under the bus. Replace him with someone less controversial, someone who can do Trump's bidding without generating constant headlines about politicization and corruption. The broader implications for FBI credibility are devastating. The Bureau's reputation has been damaged by Patel's tenure. Career agents are demoralized. The public sees the FBI as politicized. This Epstein files controversy makes it worse because now the FBI is seen as protecting elite criminals rather than investigating them, as hiding evidence rather than pursuing justice. Rebuilding the FBI's reputation after Patel is gone will take years. It will require new leadership committed to independence and professionalism. It will require demonstrating through actions that the Bureau serves the American people, not political masters. The precedent for government transparency is also significant. Judge Berman's order could set an important precedent. It says that bogus claims of secrecy won't be allowed to shield the government from disclosure requirements, that courts will scrutinize government claims that files can't be released, that public interest and transparency can outweigh government preference for secrecy. This could affect other cases where agencies are trying to hide information. It gives transparency advocates legal ammunition to demand disclosure in other contexts. What this means for victims is deeply personal. The Epstein files contain information about victims, who they were, what happened to them, how they were recruited and trafficked. Some of that information should remain confidential to protect their privacy, but other information about who the perpetrators and enablers were should be public. Victims have been fighting for years for their stories to be heard and for the people who hurt them to face consequences. This order moves toward that goal. It's not complete justice. Epstein is dead, Maxwell is in prison, but others who participated or enabled might finally face scrutiny. The international dimension is also significant. Epstein's network wasn't just American. It included people from around the world. British royalty, French business figures, Israeli intelligence connections have been mentioned in some theories. When these files are released, there could be international diplomatic incidents. Foreign governments might be embarrassed or implicated. That could affect relationships between countries. The State Department is probably already preparing for potential fallout. The conspiracy theory ecosystem will explode when these files drop. This release will be a field day for conspiracy theorists. Every name mentioned will be analyzed and theorized about. Every connection will be expanded into elaborate theories. Some of the theories will be based on real evidence revealed in the files. Others will be complete fabrications. The challenge for responsible media will be sorting out what's actually in the files versus what is speculation and conspiracy. But regardless, this story is going to generate endless content and discussion online. The legal jeopardy for people named in the files is real. If the files show someone participated in or enabled Epstein's trafficking, they could face criminal charges. Statutes of limitation might apply to some conduct, but trafficking charges can have long limitations periods. And some of Epstein's victims were recently underage when crimes occurred, so statutes might not have run yet. Anyone named in the files in concerning context should be lawyering up immediately, because prosecutors will be looking at this information and considering whether charges are warranted. What happens if Patel defies the order? This is the nightmare scenario for rule of law. If a presidential appointee openly defies a federal judge's order, what remedy exists? Theoretically, the judge can hold Patel in contempt, can fine the FBI, can even order Patel jailed until he complies. But actually enforcing those orders against the head of the FBI is complicated. The FBI has guns. They're law enforcement. Who arrests the FBI director if he refuses to comply? U.S. Marshals. But the Marshals are also part of the Justice Department. This could create a real constitutional crisis if Patel decides to openly defy the judge. The most likely scenario is that Patel will comply grudgingly with significant delays and attempts to limit disclosure. He'll release some documents. He'll claim others are still protected. He'll redact heavily. And there will be ongoing battles about whether each release is adequate. This will drag on for months. But documents will start coming out, and each release will generate new stories and revelations. Trump's response to this courtroom defeat will be important. He could publicly back Patel and attack the judge. That would turn this into a political battle between Trump and the judiciary. Or he could distance himself from Patel and the issue, letting Patel take the fall. That would be smarter politically, but would require Trump to abandon a loyalist. Trump's instinct is usually to double down and attack. So we'll probably see him going after Judge Berman on social media, claiming bias, suggesting the judge is part of some conspiracy. That will further politicize the issue, but won't change the legal outcome. Congress will use this as ammunition for oversight. There will be hearings about why Patel fought so hard to hide these files, about whether he was ordered to do so by Trump, about what he knew about the contents of the files that made him so desperate to keep them secret. Patel will likely refuse to testify or will take the fifth, but the hearings will generate publicity and put pressure on him. Judge Berman humiliated FBI Director Patel in court, rejecting his misleading arguments and ordering the release of the Epstein files. The ruling is a victory for transparency over elite secrecy, and powerful people are nervous as documents that could implicate them are about to drop.